So, some of the issues with Kant's approach to sexual ethics, which, let's be honest, you're always going to have issues when you try and apply a kind of a normative approach to something which is so personal and kind of revolves around bodily autonomy, like sexual ethics, telling people what they can and can't, should and shouldn't do with their own bodies, and how they should and shouldn't express love, desire, etc. Is never going to be something that everyone agrees to. Some of the issues relating to Kant specifically are firstly his idea about homosexuality not being permissible because it would ultimately lead to the end of the human race. You know, people would no longer procreate; it couldn't be universalized. Well, we don't necessarily need to apply the universal principle, universal law to people's sexual behaviours. If we look at it statistically speaking, the vast majority of people do identify as heterosexual, and so kind of we don't necessarily need to do anything about the people who identify their sexual attraction in other ways, because statistically speaking they're in the minority, and so it's really unlikely that we're going to end up with being in a position where we can't, populate the earth and humans die out because of a small percentage, minority of people being homosexual, bisexual, pansexual, etc. So it just seems like a bit of a stretch, we'll say. It's almost like feels a bit like fear mongering, if I'm being honest. So kind of, oh no, we can't allow these other forms of sexual orientation to exist because they're going to take over the world. And I don't think, statistically speaking, that's really something that Kant should have been concerned about. The second issue is related to his kind of ideas about marriage, really. He was a bit kind of, again, I want to say naive, really, in his ideas about marriage being the best place for people to express sexual desires. It's kind of ignorant of the fact that, especially these days, there is a significant number of marriages which end in divorce. Something like 40% of marriages. There's historical kind of concerns over the concept of marriage essentially just being a way of enslaving women. If we're talking in its original form, it was literally a way of selling a woman to her husband by her father. And so, marriage, Kant seems to have his rose tinted spectacles on, in terms of seeing it as this kind of, meeting of equals and a way of kind of having a mutually beneficial, consenting sexual relationship. Historically, that has just not been the case with marriages. And today, the fact that so many are ending in divorce would suggest that, now that it's less taboo for marriages to end in divorce, that kind of suggests that, yeah, people weren't really having these mutually beneficial relationships just because they'd decided to get married. Thirdly, his issue, not issue, but framing of sex and sexual relationships as being something which we need to apply rationality and reason to feels kind of a bit odd and, not really appropriate when we're talking about sexual relationships, because sex is emotional. It is a way of expressing oneself. And so to kind of apply purely a rational lens to that and say that, we have to continuously be thinking about these things in a logical and an ordered manner, rather than allowing them to be kind of expressions of how we're feeling, expressions of kind of passion, intimacy, lust. It just seems at odds with what we as human beings tend to view sex as. It isn't something that we should be viewing in entirely rational, or from an entirely rational perspective, if we're really kind of doing it right almost.